everybody. Welcome to Mish Mash Men. This is a special episode that we're going to record today. First off, my partner rather, Dusty Labar to my immediate right.
Hello, everybody. I'm to Adam's immediate right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Opposite of what you see on the logo.
Yes.
And today, first off, any shout outs for our sponsor?
Charlie Mike Never Weekend Apparel.
That's the one.
Best t-shirt company that's ever been invented or ever started.
That's right.
That's
Absolutely.
what the people say.
That's what our card says.
Yes. And please, if you want one of their awesome t-shirts, you can go onto our Instagram page.
Yep.
Their link is in our Instagram page.
Or Twitter.
You can go right to their website. They have a bunch of other options, including our RFTB Studios shirts, Reaching for the Bar shirts, Mish Mash Men shirts, and plus they do a bunch of other stuff. You've seen my Zuckerberg versus Musk shirt.
Yeah.
They made those. So anything your heart's desire, they can make.
Absolutely. Charlie Mike Never Weekend. And our special guest today, we're going to interview Mr. Ethan Woodruff. And we'll do I'll ask him to do a quick intro so he can describe himself. But the major topics that we're going to talk about is NALS, which stands for
North Alabama Zoological Society.
All right. Thank you. And we're also going to talk about artificial intelligence, because what goes together more than those two topics right there?
Makes sense to me.
Now, Ethan, if you could just describe, just tell the folks, our listeners, a little bit about yourself, and then we'll just start talking about your efforts at NALS.
All right. Well, I think probably the interesting aspects of me is the fact that I'm part of NALS. So I'm the executive director, and here in about a week, NALS will have its 4th anniversary. So we've been around for 4 years.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Previously to doing this effort, I moved here from Michigan. I used to travel quite a bit, worked for a company called the MathWorks, where I did some AI stuff.
Okay.
So when I worked for them, but kind of got tired of the travel, so looked for a new job, came down here, love it, and we noticed that there wasn't a zoo, and so we, with a bunch of others, have kind of combined together to help bring a zoo to here.
That's awesome.
So you started about 4 years ago. What precipitated that, other than we don't have a zoo here? Like, did you always have a zoologic bent?
Well, no. I mean, I grew up on a farm, and most of my friends growing up were animals, because you live too far away to just hang out with friends. So
right.
So
like what kind of animals?
Cows, goats, chickens, all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matter of fact, we had a goat named Frenchie.
Frenchie.
Yeah.
Frenchie the goat.
We were not too kind to Frenchie, and he paid it back in kind as well.
Yeah.
So,
Well, goats are ornery.
yeah. But I don't believe we should treat the animals the way that I treated Frenchie. But like I said, he took it and gave it right back to us. So it was required there. But yeah. So, and then when I got married, one of the favorite things that we did as a family was to go to zoos. Living up in Michigan, in the Detroit area, there's zoos all over, and then in Ohio, you got some of the best zoos in the country.
That's right. Go Buckeyes.
Ohio has some of the best zoos in the country?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Maybe not football, but
Terrible
zoos.
football.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it's kind of been a kind of a family thing. And when we moved down here, one time, shortly before we started NALS, I went on a daddy-daughter date to the Birmingham Zoo. And as we were going around and watching the animals, and I was watching my daughter, she loves sloths. So we're sitting at the sloth area, and she's just cooing and doing all the things that little girls do when they find something amazing. And I started seeing all these people going by, and these families, some of them a little bit, if you've ever taken a family to the zoo, sometimes you're a little bit tired. But
Yeah.
but there's a overall happiness and joy there that you see. And I started watching that, And then we came out of the primate house there and noticed, this was earlier in the morning, and noticed all the moms with strollers. They were jogging and talking, and they had their Starbucks coffees and everything. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And then you just keep going around the zoo and seeing all these happy things. And finally, the one thing that started getting me thinking about it was we're in the butterfly garden, and there was a grandmother there with her 4-year-old grandson, 4 or 5-year-old grandson. And he had a butterfly on his finger. I don't know if you've ever tried to get a butterfly on your finger, but
I tried catching them and it didn't
not
end
easy.
well.
yeah, no. So the fact that he had one there was pretty impressive. But she was holding his hand still, and just the joy on his face and her face as they are looking at this butterfly sitting on the top of his finger. And I was like, why doesn't Huntsville have one of these? And at that time, it wasn't that Huntsville was the biggest city in Alabama yet.
Mm-hmm.
It probably was. We just didn't know it yet. But it was projected to be, and you're hearing about all this growth and everything. And I'm like, well, if we're big enough and we're growing big enough, why don't we have this?
Mm-hmm.
So that just precipitated going to find out why. And it turns out that there really wasn't a good reason.
Gotcha.
Just nobody had done the work.
Yeah. There's been efforts in the past. Usually the efforts were more on a private basis.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has a farm or some land and they want to get some animals and they enjoy it and then they start charging people, to come. That works okay for some, but it doesn't seem to have been very successful around here. There are some folks that are doing some of that stuff in the area still, but you can't grow very big, and you're not going to make a substantial zoo like what you would think a zoo should be.
Right.
So a quick note on that. So I mentioned this to you before, but for the listeners, Ethan and I worked together. And when I first wasn't introduced to you personally, but the team is being described by someone else. And Ethan Woodruff, he works in the lab. He does a lot of good work with modeling these hardware systems. So it's just a software model of a hardware system. But he's also trying to start a zoo. And I'm thinking like what you described. And so I'm just kind of like, like they got an alpaca and, a goat and a chicken or two running around, and then that's the zoo.
Right.
And I kind of said something like, like kind of like that. And the other guy's like, no, this is like a legit, like large scope operation. So some of the listeners might not understand when you say zoo, it's not something small scope. It's of substance. It's like a legitimate zoo and like animal preserve almost.
Yeah. So just to kind of take it back a little bit.
Sure.
When I talk to officials and people in the zoo industry, the first 5 minutes is an interview. Like, is this guy a wacko? Just wants to play with the tigers?
Gotcha.
Right. Yeah.
Or
like
is
Tiger
this-
King.
Tiger King.
Yeah. Or is this a legitimate effort trying to? So my first 5 minutes is always an interview.
Gotcha.
And when it comes back to it, what we're talking about, a legitimate zoo, it's a business.
Yeah.
Right.
Now we care about the animals. Or otherwise we wouldn't be doing this.
Well, you'd be a poor businessman if you mistreated the animals.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's in your vested interest.
If you can't take care of the animals and if the business isn't successful enough to do such, then it's not legitimate.
Yeah.
And so a lot of our initial research and questioning was, how is this a business?
Mm-hmm.
Going and asking other zoos, how do you stay in business? And it's hard.
Yeah.
They spend every money they make,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? And then they go ask for more.
Right.
But that's part of it is that you have to have a business that is structured or modeled to support that type of endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
The other part is certification, accreditation, those type of things. And really the foremost accreditation in the United States is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, AZA. And they don't just look at how you're treating the animals. That's very big. They also look at your business practices as well. And so it's all encompassing of a business and conservation, education, and all those aspects that make up the modern zoo.
Gotcha.
Now, are they do they sanction the zoo and say, okay, the Nowls will be, we give it this 1 star to 5 star, you pass this threshold, and that's why they look at your books and your plan, your business plan, and all of that?
They don't give you a rating per se, but you do get accredited.
Okay.
So if you're accredited by the AZA, then it's kind of your gold star seal of approval.
So they actually look at how you're treating the animals, but then they also look at to make sure you know how to run a business.
Yeah,
that's something. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah,
because again, if the business fails, then the animals will suffer.
they have to figure out something to do with the animals, and it becomes a bigger problem. That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they need food, they need care.
Yeah.
They need someone to care.
Because if you're failing, you can't pay for the food, and you can't do a lot of other things.
Right.
I would assume
The labor.
Yeah.
Yep.
That makes
Interesting.
sense. Yeah.
So, interest in zoos just as a consumer of the product known as a zoo. And you saw that there's a gap here. So, but how do you, because I love pizza, and there's a local pizza place that around Dayton called Marion's Pizza. And I would love to have Marion's Pizza here. But the only way that would happen is if I started a business called Marion's Pizza.
Right.
But I'm not interested in that at all. So there is some sort of, it's beyond just a love of an interest in zoos. Like, how did you cross that gap? Because you could say, well, it sure would be great to have a zoo, and then you go back to whatever hobbies you have.
Yeah.
Well, some days I wonder if I have any hobbies because this takes up all my time.
I imagine it does.
But it's really just more of a recipe. First you got to do the work and research to figure out what it needs to be looking like and modeled like, and then you got to start making the contacts with zoo professionals and advisors and consultants and lawyers.
Yeah. But that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, we hired BRPH. They're local here in town. They're a engineering architecture firm. Locally in town, they're probably most well known for helping redo the engine test stand for NASA out on post. But some of the things that they do that are more fun is that they help create the Hagrid's ride at Universal Studios.
Oh, wow.
Or the Ratatouille ride at Disney World.
Dang.
Yeah, so these guys are legit, right? And they went and found the best zoo architects, which is Perry Becker Design. And they're the ones that actually designed all of Animal Kingdom for Disney World.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
And they're currently the AZA preferred designer for a lot of those big zoos. So a lot of the big zoos, if you pay attention, they're doing a lot of expansions right now.
Yeah.
And Perry Becker Design is, in the middle of that.
Do they consider Animal Kingdom a zoo? Is that what they consider it as?
Well, there's a preserved part of it, right?
Yeah, it's AZA accredited.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess I wouldn't have even thought that.
You can go on these little rides where you go see the...
I was there. I've been there when I was a kid. I just never thought that it was, when you're a kid, you're like, I didn't think of it as a zoo.
Yeah.
I was like, it's just a theme park. Yeah.
It is weird.
Yeah, it's more attraction than most zoos are, but it's also got some very leading edge technology and practices that a lot of zoos are trying to do. One of the issues, and interesting thing for us, is a lot of your zoos are 70, 80, 100 years old, right? And they started out by, the circus came in town and some of their animals were a little bit sick, and so they just left them to the city, and the city had to put them in the park someplace.
Oh my God.
And the zoo kind of grew up out of that type of
wow
donation type of a thing. And the zoo always wasn't necessarily given the prime spot. It was someplace next to the railroad station or something.
Gotcha.
Because that's where the circus was. And if you look, a lot of these zoos are still there, and they've created these great expanses and exhibits and different things, but a lot of them are landlocked, and they're put in areas that really wouldn't want to be. And so, and then they have infrastructure that's been there for decades, and it's very costly to tear it down and build
Sure.
new stuff up. So we're at a unique position where we're building from scratch,
Yeah.
just like Animal Kingdom. And so they were able to put a lot of interesting things into Animal Kingdom. For once, I'm going to go through a lot of, and I do this, I apologize, but still staying on that tack, but something that Animal Kingdom does is they get the lions to come up close to the visitors. Now, when you go to a zoo, you want to see something big.
Yeah.
Right? That's why you go. But most everybody's like that. What they don't realize is the big things really don't do anything during the day.
Right.
Right.
It's usually dusk or dawn or those
It's
type
like
of
me.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
You've seen me.
Oh, it's like me too. And so when you go see the lion, what does the lion do?
Just laying
Yeah.
there, right?
Typically just like chilling out, right?
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
big cat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cats don't do anything.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
They
right.
knock things off shelves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no shelf, so
Yeah.
Exactly. And so what Animal Kingdom did was they put a bunch of cooling mats right next to the window. So if the lion's going to lay anywhere, it's going to lay next to the window because it's cool.
That makes sense. Wow. That's smart.
Yeah. And so they did a lot of innovative things like that. And then while it is attraction, it really is an attraction, where most zoos are more or less of that. They educate you about this animal and if there's any plight that they're dealing with, or and its habitat and all that stuff. So it really has become a model for the modern zoo. Not so much the attraction portion of
Right.
it, but the zoo portion of it. Yeah.
How large of a zoo is like a normal size zoo? Like, are you guys like I guess the ultimate question is what size zoo, how much space does it cover, the one that you're thinking of? And what is the average around the country?
So that's a very interesting question. Within Alabama, the Alabama Gulf Coast Zoo, if somebody remembers the Little Zoo That Could, their TV show, that zoo was right on the coast, and the hurricanes came, and they'd have to evacuate the animals all the time and rebuild it and everything. So they were able to take their little 7-acre zoo and move it inland. Now it's 25 plus acres.
Okay.
And they do really well. Sacramento Zoo is on the verge of taking their 10, 15-acre zoo and move it into more of a 100-acre zoo.
Oh, 100 acres. Wow.
Yeah. Somebody don't kill me on this, but I think Cincinnati is somewhere around 70 to 80 acres.
Okay.
But also remember that they're landlocked, so they can't grow any bigger than they are.
right,
And as we learn more about animals, they need more space.
right.
Right.
And so you're dealing with that. Nashville and Birmingham are over 100 acres, about 120 acres of zoo portion. And, but I don't think you would call Birmingham a big zoo. But acreage-wise, it is a big zoo.
Yeah.
Compared to Cincinnati, which is a big zoo.
Yeah.
Right? So what I'm getting at is it's kind of relative.
Sure.
And also is how you design the zoo and put the placement of things. One of my favorite zoos is Toledo. It's 50 acres, but you turn around everywhere. There's not one place where you're going to turn around and not see an animal.
I got you. So
Right.
they have good space utilization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we want to take advantage of all these things that other zoos have done and learned and put them into our zoo. Our plans are to have approximately 300 acres.
Oh, wow.
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 Now, only about 30 or 40 of that would be walking,
Okay.
your traditional walking zoo. And then around that will be areas for safaris. So
Oh, cool.
Like in the Yellowstone Park area, you'll be able to ride a horse
Oh,
through
my
parts of the safari area and be with the animals there.
Wow.
In the African safari area, you might be able to do a Land Cruiser. We got to do
wow.
Land Cruisers because Toyota's here, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
That's smart. That's smart. Yeah.
And then in the Asian area, you might do rope bridges and zip lines and other stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, but we're giving a lot more space,
Mm-hmm.
and not just for the animals, but for the people.
Sure.
And hopefully we won't ever get landlocked that
Yeah.
big. So that's about how big we're looking.
Yeah. And you said that where are you looking at area wise to put it in Huntsville?
We're looking
the Huntsville area.
We're looking in Limestone County along the I-65 corridor.
Okay.
We don't have a long story short, we had gone into partnership with a developer for a specific spot,
Mm-hmm.
and that developer contracted cancer and had to pull out of the development. And
Gotcha.
that produced some bad news.
Mm-hmm.
But the intention, we're working with Limestone County officials is to work along that I-65 corridor. It allows us to grab tourism
Mm-hmm.
from the corridor, people
Yeah.
going to the beaches from up north or heading up north.
Yep.
It's very convenient to the center of Mass, which is Huntsville.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, Decatur's getting big too, and so they can get there, and so it's regionally, it's a very ideal spot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Especially because you've got, like you said, Decatur growing, Huntsville, Madison kind of growing, a lot of manufacturing going between the two, 65 all the way up in that area between the Huntsville, Madison, Decatur area to Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
It just continues to grow.
Yeah.
And then Athens, not a lot of people are paying attention, maybe.
That's
I don't
right.
know, but Athens is growing quite a bit.
Yeah, rapidly.
Yeah.
It is.
Just in housing, because people want to live a little bit further away from where they work. And
Right.
yeah.
Yep.
Are you getting any kind of pushback from the local community about just, hey, you're building a zoo and that where animals get mistreated or anything like that? Any kind of dealings with them?
I would say that for every 500, matter of fact, we did a survey, and we got 600 applicants and only 3 negative comments.
Oh.
Really?
That's pretty good.
And only one of those was zoos treat animals poorly.
Right.
And in the old days, a zoo was a menagerie. But like I was saying, the new zoos are all about conservation and preservation. Another thing that people don't understand is, where do we get the animals? These animals do not come from the wild. These animals were born in zoos. They're born in captivity.
Gotcha.
So if you let them out in the wild, they'd probably die because
Gotcha.
they're not, they don't have those wild smarts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
Um,
that's good.
and a lot of them actually, while we don't want to have a lot of people petting and being around the animals, because it's not good for the animals. It can spread diseases and different things like that. But the animals have often have a lot of relationship with their caregivers, their zookeepers, and so they have that fear of humans is not there anymore.
Right.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, a lot of the animals come from other institutions.
So you have to, as you're building the zoo, you have to reach out to these other zoos, and you're like, hey, I'm about to start a zoo. Do you have any of these animals? Do you have any of these animals? And you guys buy them?
No. And that's the cool thing is, in the zoo community, it's kind of assumed that nobody owns the animals.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
So they live at a zoo,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say that my wife likes okapis. So let's say that
What's that?
It's the closest relative to a giraffe.
Oh,
It
okay.
looks it does have the giraffe type of head, long neck and long tongue, but it looks more like a mule or horse with zebra stripes on the back
Oh, that's
end.
cool.
Okay.
I've never seen one of those.
Well, we need to get one.
Yeah.
You guys need
That's,
to get.
that's the
yeah.
purpose of the zoo,
Yep.
Exactly. We got to get some.
to educate us.
So if the okapi, which they come from Africa and they are struggling a little bit too. If okapi parents have offspring, well, most zoos only have enough room for so many okapi. And so when you, and the whole purpose here is to preserve the species. So we need to have babies, but we need someplace for the babies to go.
Gotcha.
Or maybe the babies stay and we need someplace for mom or dad to go.
Gotcha.
And so that the zoos move them around in breeding programs and different things. And really the cost is the moving them around.
I gotcha.
I imagine that has to be those bloodlines have to be documented. The zoos probably, by their nature, they're going to keep track of all that because you want to avoid inbreeding.
Yep.
I know, like I had a homestead farm for a while, and every once in a while we have to get a new bull bloodline in because we don't want too much. Well, there's going to be some inbreeding. It's unavoidable. But you try to minimize it by getting fresh bloodlines. So they have to keep track of that. So there's probably some, to borrow a term, horse trading in your bloodline, especially the sires.
Yes, and that's one of the things that the AZA does. Is they kind of keep track of the breeding programs. They call them SAFE. And I'm going to screw up because I forget what the acronym is. But yeah, they keep track of this. It's species, it's survival plans, yeah, something like that. But they keep track of it, and at each zoo you have what's called a registrar. And the registrar keeps track of not only the bloodlines and all that, but every time the animal had to have medicated medication. And so they're probably the most documented things on the earth.
Yeah.
Is these animals that live in these institutions.
Interesting. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah.
But they have to keep tabs on that.
Yeah.
So they probably move, like you were saying, sometimes they'll move the baby, but then sometimes they'll move mama or something like that, and they'll just kind of keep. That's interesting.
So you want to switch gears yet, or you want to?
I'm good for whatever. Yeah.
Okay. You got next.
Okay, so let me ask you. So shovel in the ground to people are entering the park. Mm-hmm. What's a timeline look like for you guys?
So right now, I'm currently working on some legislative funding proposals, and hopefully that will come about in the next, next year and a half. Mm-hmm. And once that gets through, it's a year to do your design work, and then another 2 years for construction.
Okay.
So best case scenario, 2027.
Okay. So you're shooting for 2027 for people entering the park.
Yes.
So that's cool. That's exciting.
That is exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Maybe you can have our banner hanging up.
Definitely.
Because we'll be big. Real big.
Yeah, it'll be
huge.
Well,
celebrities.
We'll have you guys, maybe what we'll do is, so the first areas are going to be the Alabama native area, and there's going to be a place called the Cosmic Jungle where a lot of the species that went up into space will be located at.
Yeah.
And then Australia area. So we'll let you do a special podcast from one of those areas.
There you go.
And people could observe us like we're monkeys.
Yeah, put us behind glass.
Be entertained.
Yeah, don't tap the glass when they're
Do
recording.
not feed the podcast hosts.
Maybe it'll be the monkeys watching you.
Yeah. They probably won't find us that interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ready. You want to switch?
Yeah.
Yeah, you lead it off.
So, so we work together. You are a, by background, like education background, physicist?
Yep.
Okay. And, but you do software modeling of hardware components that's for the project that you're currently on.
Right.
And you've done a lot of modeling, and we've enjoyed some jokes over modeling. And, we also wanted to talk about artificial intelligence. So with that bit of background, so that folks know that you know what you're talking about, way more than we do.
Yeah.
Way more. Because it would come from a Wikipedia article. So artificial intelligence, is it all that it's made out to be? I know the vice president gave a thorough dissertation of artificial intelligence the other day. It's 2 words. Artificial and intelligence.
Artificial intelligence.
And there's machine learning in there somewhere, according to her. So what's the current state? Where are we going with this? And are there any kind of limitations?
All right. So I think just to kind of take back, do you guys remember a show on PBS called Scientific Frontiers with Alan Alda?
Yes. Alan Alda.
Alda.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah. So I'm
from TV's MASH.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But he used to go and find all these really cool things, and robots was definitely one that was on this show a lot. And he went to MIT, and that's the first time they didn't call it artificial intelligence, but that's the first time that I really was introduced to the idea as a young person of computers learning. Mm-hmm. Right. And that was the idea, is they were watching how humans learn, and trying to figure out ways that we could teach computers without having to program everything into them. And that's kind of the antithesis, at least from my point of view, what artificial intelligence is, and how it gets to be what it is. So when I worked for the MathWorks, it had made some big strides. There's what's called black box modeling. And the idea here is that you have, if you imagine a box, I have some inputs that these are known. I know what these are. And then I put them into this box. It does some stuff and outputs some results. And so now if I say, okay, I put in an unknown input, this box should kind of tell me a little bit about what I just put in as far as the results, because we've trained it. Okay, so that's called black box modeling. And then there are things called neural networks, and then out of that has spawned machine learning, and now really into this AI stuff that we're talking about. And when I was working with the MathWorks, I got involved with it a little bit more with ADAS. Are you familiar with ADAS? It's essentially, the problem with being in the military, we know all these acronyms, we forget what they mean. But essentially it's automotive systems that, safety systems that essentially you're braking, right?
Okay.
You're following around and it has ADAS, and you want to, you initialize the braking system so that you can cruise control, but all of a sudden somebody stops in front of you and it stops for you. That's an artificial intelligence type of a thing, because they've trained it based on different stimulus to look for these things and then react for you.
Gotcha.
So I got involved in a little bit of that when I was working for the MathWorks as well. But in the last 10 years, it's taken a huge jump of the way that they can train these models. They're really finding different algorithms that can quickly hone in on very specifics of of an image or a song or words or whatever that is. And then if you take a whole bunch of them that are the same, the model knows what that is and what we should do with it. And so that's kind of my background. Of course, I've been out of it for about 5-6 years since moving to Huntsville, but it's pretty incredible, I think. And from what I see, we're still a long ways from them taking over the world.
Yeah.
But it's very useful. I mean, as an engineer who has to write documents, most people don't realize that when you're writing in Word and that little blinking red line under your word or set of words, that's artificial intelligence telling you that you're using the passive voice. You want to use more active voice. And so people have been using it actually for quite some time.
Right. So the question that everybody always asks, when you talk about artificial intelligence, are you afraid that it's going to take over the world, or that it has the capability to do something crazy? Or is it just, I've heard another argument where it's well, it's only going to do what I tell it to do. It's never going to do any more than that. It can't do, I've heard that argument. Then I've also heard, we're teaching it to learn and eventually it's going to be able to do it on its own.
Yeah. As in this software routine does X, but then it has the capability to write its own software to do X plus Y.
Right.
And then how many iterations of that could go on until it's now bypassing, the limits and then constraints 1, 2, and 3 that you set on it because we weren't clear enough in those rules. So,
right.
Yeah. So am I scared? I don't think so. But as humans, and I program, every day, and I always put stupid stuff in. Even when I try to be, very meticulous about it, I still end up putting something stupid in there, and we have to fix that. And think about these black models. You're training them with a bunch of data, and we've seen this with Google with their ads, and when you watch YouTube, right? They're putting advertisements based on what you watch and stuff. And if you were to take a left turn at some place, all of a sudden that's in the algorithm. And so if you put something stupid in the algorithm, you've corrupted it.
Right.
So that's one of the things that we got to worry about is and realize that we can't rely on is if we can corrupt the model, then we're going to get bad results.
Right.
And so we got to be careful about that. And I'm certain that the scientists are doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, like we were talking about ChatGPT earlier before we started. They're on 3.5, which was put out like in 2021, and and 4.0 is a beta. So they're taking slow chunks at this. But that's one thing you got to worry about though is corrupting the model.
Right.
It's like corrupting a little child.
Yeah.
Put the wrong information into the child, and they're gonna.
Yeah, because they were saying that it will. This is a very uneducated way to talk about it, but I'm just going to say it. So, like, from my understanding, is these programmers, whoever's teaching it or modeling it, tell it a certain thing. So, like, because there's so much trash on the internet that they have to tell it not to do certain things, because there's so much stuff that's not true, or like that they have to pull from stuff that they think is true. Or does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I guess what you're saying is, like, if somebody doesn't do that exactly right, and you have, if you search something, it can pull bad data because it's been trained or learned to pull bad data that way. So that's what you're trying to say we're trying to avoid, and is that. But is that by trial and error, or like just before you release it to people, see what it does and then keep altering it constantly?
Yeah. And again, going back to the automotive example, it makes big headlines when one of the Tesla cars screw up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Tesla's doing its best. I have to honestly believe Tesla engineers are doing their best to train these models and everything to make good, correct decisions.
Right.
But there's always the one thing that we didn't think about, or the set of circumstances. And so they're doing their best.
Right.
And it will only get better. Software only gets better, right? We see it at work all the time.
That's correct.
Now, as far as the next steps of the software training itself, that is something I believe that they're trying to figure out. But then again, you don't want the software going off in the weeds. And
Right.
So.
Yeah, it has to be constraints, limits to that, how far it can be allowed to go. Is it fair to say that the general public expectation for AI is similar to almost all other technologies, where they overestimate what it's actually capable of doing, and so they have this unrealistic expectation of what AI really is. And I've seen that time and time again when it comes to just previous work that I've done, just the general knowledge of whatever fill in the blank, whatever subpopulation. There's an unrealistic expectation of the current state of the art. Is that the same thing for AI?
So I don't know if I have the experience to make a good comment about it, but I can tell you about my own experience.
Sure.
Again, it'd been a while since I really played with AI, and I have a couple, hobby projects I want to do with AI at home, dealing with images and stuff. But lately, I ChatGPT stuff came out, and I was like, all right, well, let me see what we can do with this. And so my expectation was, I don't know what it can do. I hear people say these incredible things. I see some examples on the internet, and I'm like, okay, how hard is it to get what they're describing?
Right.
Are they putting a lot of work in there, or can you just type a few things and get stuff out? And so I think most consumers are probably on that. It's like, well, let me see what I can do with it. I will tell you that in some instances, I was actually kind of disappointed. I was actually hoping that I could do a little bit more, especially the image stuff. Some of the image stuff that you see is pretty cool, but they must be, whoever gets some of those images, they're essentially programming this, do this, it look like this, and and a lot of trial and error on that.
Yeah, to touch on what you were just saying, in my mind, you have a kid that's like, write me an A English paper, and then it comes out, and they're like, well, this is stupid, this doesn't even work. But the guys that can really do it know how to prompt it. Like, you hear people say, like, oh, if you really know how to prompt it, you can pretty much get whatever you want, like legal documents or whatever. You just have to circumvent it, because it'll say, I'm not a lawyer, I can't give you legal advice or whatever. But I've talked to people, they're like, oh yeah, if you know how to prompt it it'll write you pretty much anything you want. So I think that's what
Yeah.
what you kind of meant? Like the people were like, oh, this thing is so stupid. It didn't even write me an English paper on the first try.
Well, I was speaking more to the fear that some folks might have about artificial intelligence. Is it going to take over their world? Because they think of what they see in the movies. And generally speaking, whatever's in the movies is highly inaccurate.
Yeah.
No, if you aren't good about it, let's say that artificial, we're putting it in our car, right, and letting it control some of the things that we would normally control, but usually it's because we aren't good at it. Braking all of a sudden, we're just not good at it,
right?
And so we're letting the computer to do. But there could be a situation where, let's talk about a power grid, and there's a lot of computers in the power grid, and somebody puts a little bit of AI in there to kind of control, and so we don't get as many blackouts or brownouts and that type of stuff. Foreseeably, if you put the wrong thing in there, it could cause some issues. Again, if it gets corrupted, or it just it's like War Games.
Yeah.
Right? Remember War Games, the movie?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we're playing this game. And you're like, no, just shut it down. No, we have to finish the game.
Right.
So you brought up the car braking thing. We had a similar discussion, if you recall, the Trust and Automation episode. It was episode 2. It's a good one. You might enjoy it. And so would the listeners that have come on board afterwards. That was a great episode.
They would love it.
But we talk about that trust and automation that a community has to have, or a subset of a population that's going to use that. There's a certain amount of trust that you have to get to where it's going to do. One, you have to be educated on what the automation is, what is being automated, its limitations and restrictions, and then that trust factor. How much are you going to trust that? Because if I have the system that's using sensors to determine if there's an obstacle in front of me in my car, the human can make a decision like that, a judgment call on what's more important, the raccoon that ran in front of me or the baby carriage that is not in view of the sensor that the car would swerve to. Now, all three of us probably would just, okay, goodbye, raccoon. But the system may not know that, so it's very useful for that population to know, okay, what's it going to do? What's its limitations? And is there a judgment call that has to be made? And when do I need to enter into the control loop? So,
yep. The other part of the control loop is lawyers.
Yes. Yeah. They come in after the fact,
but
they're like the giant feedback loop.
Yeah. Well, or when you're designing these things as well, in the back of your mind is, okay, if something goes wrong, am I going to get sued?
Yeah.
Right? So as you're creating this technology and implementing this technology as well, it's one of those factors that also helps put in safeguards, because the last thing you want to do is hurt somebody, or that by itself is bad enough. But then you're going to have a bunch of lawyers coming after you and stuff like that. So at least in the United States, there's that factor as well that's puts a little bit more of regulation, even though it's not formal regulation, but regulation on what we're doing to make sure that it's implemented properly. And so
makes sense.
So one last, we're getting close to wrap up time, but where and back to the zoo, Nows. Where can our listeners find out more about Nows and what's going on and how they can help, maybe? Because there might be a burgeoning zoo keeper that has yet to be hired that is all about it. So where can they find out more information?
So if you want to go to www.nalzs.org, that will take you to our website. We have some frequently asked questions there, and there's a support page where it talks about all the different ways that you can support us, either through a donation or in-kind type of stuff, or volunteering. We have about 60 volunteers.
Oh, wow.
That are dedicated to a very specific task on this. So we're not a small organization by any means. And then we have some educational programming. We have an education department and a conservation department with volunteers that are running that. And we're always doing events where we're looking for more volunteers to come and help us. So yeah, there's lots of things to help kind of move the cause along.
Yeah, that's great.
And one more question. What about, because you mentioned legislation, and I'm sure there's a lobbying effort. What about our listeners contacting their local legislators? Would that be helpful?
Oh yeah, definitely. So we're working hand in hand with the legislators. I have meetings with them on a regular basis for some of them, and then even with the local mayors and city councilmen and women. It's important to let them know that you want a zoo, because they're trying to prioritize all the things that are happening in the area.
Right.
We're growing. So, I was talking to one legislator the other day, and he's like, well, my constituents, he's in the Madison area. And he goes, like, my constituents would prefer us to put the money into roads. And I'm like, well, of course they would.
Yes.
I've driven in Madison. I understand that.
I second that motion.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're always going to be dealing with that.
Right.
If it's not building roads, it's going to be filling out the potholes, or
maybe making a shoulder. Just
a little
spitballing a shoulder would be nice.
So those are things that we need to be working on continuously. Putting in a zoo is an investment. It's a financial investment. It's a quality of life investment. It's an investment that we also need to be doing these type of investments. You've seen Huntsville do the Orion Amphitheater. You've seen Madison do Toyota Field. So these are investments in our community, and they're helping also generate funds that can put roads in and things like that. So,
Cool.
Yeah.
That was very informative.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out, Ethan.
Yeah.
No problem.
Hope you had a good time.
Yeah.
And we hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you have any questions, feel free to ask it on our page, or you can email us as well, and we can point you in the right direction.
Absolutely.
But make sure you go to nalzs.org for more information, and be on the lookout here in the next couple of years for what sounds like going to be a pretty awesome zoo.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thanks.
All right, guys. Until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.
Stay fresh.